I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today is a really important comparison, really, because what we've got here are two of the most popular medium SUVs on the Australian market. We've got our reigning champ, the Volkswagen Tiguan, which took out a four-way medium SUV comparison last year, and we've got the new Toyota RAV4, first really good, objectively really good RAV4 in a while. This one is our long-termer, the hybrid all-wheel drive. Interestingly, even in this pretty high-end form, the RAV4 is under 50 grand here, drive away, no more to pay. This Tiguan over my left shoulder is the new 132 TSI R-Line, and this is about 52 grand on the road. But what Volkswagen did was they realized everyone here is buying the Tiguan in sporty R-Line guise. So what they've done is they've chucked the body kit effectively on the mid-spec car, make it a little bit cheaper. But is it better than the RAV4? That's what we're going to be finding out. I do think that design matters on cars like this. If you're buying an SUV, it's because you need the practicality, but also if you're shelling out 50 grand, if you're hard earned, it needs to look cool. And I think the Tiguan does. The R-Line package really works on this car. Certainly better than not having it. I think the Tiguan looks a bit pedestrian in standard form, but here with the 19-inch, pardon me, twin 5-spoke wheels, the crisp white paint, the body kit, I reckon it looks pretty cool. Let me know down in the comments which of these cars you prefer the look of. This Tiguan is the 5-seat. I know in the North American markets you only get the stretched 7-seat version, but we get both. And in the cabin, what we've got here is pretty standard Tiguan fare. Now, as I said, this new sort of cheaper R-Line version is based on the Comfort line, the mid-spec car here in Australia. So that means that you do get stuff like cloth seats. You know me, I love a good cloth seat. Leather, black leather especially, it doesn't really work in Australia because it gets so hot, and yet that's what people generally buy. So give me a good cloth seat any day. And they are nice and supportive, sport seats embossed with the R logo, and you also get the R steering wheel, which looks and feels really cool. Nice grey stitching. And I gotta say, the rest of the Tiguan interior, it just feels modern. You know, we've got a nice slate touchscreen here, 8 inches. Higher end Tiguans, you can get a 9.2-inch screen, but it's a bit of a muchness. You have a standard active info display, so you can see your full mapping ahead of you. That works really well. And the layout is logical. You know, all the controls are where you'd want to find them, but the issue for me is actually perceived quality. Now, this car feels like it's stitched together and built really well, but there's just still too many scratchy plastics in the Tiguan. It doesn't feel especially Volkswagen-like. You do get soft touch stuff up on the doors and on the top of the dash and kind of on the adjustable armrest and stuff, and that's all good, but I just think adding a bit of soft touch there for the facelift of this car will be important. But practicality is great. You've got big cup holders in the center that you can deploy, little drink holders. You've got a tray ahead of the shifter with fast charging USBs, and yeah, you got this ratcheted armrest that does work well. What about in the back? Let's have a look. Because, as I mentioned, this is the 5-seat Tiguan, but it's still got to be big enough to carry 5 people in comfort. And for the most part, I think it does the job. Now, it does depend on how big and tall you are, naturally, but for myself at 6 foot, sitting behind my own driving position, it's pretty generously roomy back here. Headroom, not a problem at all. It's a tall car. Legroom's good, tow room's good. But we did have Alec, our videographer, sitting in the back before, who is a bit taller than me, and he did find it was a little bit constrained in the back, more so than in the Toyota, but we'll check that car out in a sec. What is impressive is the amenities in the back of the Tiguan. So we've got a airline style tray table. That's pretty cool. So, you know, you can set the kids up with the iPad on a road trip. How good's that? Not bad. Pop that away. You got a drink bottle holder that deploys out of the side of the tray table. I mean, it's basically a Qantas 737 back here. What more could you want? We've got air vents. We've got a separate temperature zone. That's pretty cool. And a fast charging USB port as well. 12-volt socket. We've also got an armrest, 2.5 cup holders, kind of 2 cup holders and an espresso holder. Bit unusual, but you can also slide the bench forward and backward. That's going to be important to when we talk about the boot capacity, which we're going to do in just a second. But first, I want to mention the material quality takes a big downgrade in the back. Not impressive. Hopping out, coming around the back, love the crisp look of a white Tiguan. I do think it's aging and dating well. Still got, oh, always get confused with these things. You know, you usually get a flip-up badge on Volkswagens. Not on this, it's a traditional boot opening mechanism. Now it's big space. As you can see, the two chasing cars suitcases fit nice and easy. 615 litres is the claim, but you've got to be careful. That's with the seats pushed all the way forward, where knee room is a problem for adults. If the seats are pushed back, it's somewhere south of that figure. But we got no load lip, so those suitcases go in and out nice and easy. We've got all the usual little conveniences of European cars, so we can lower the rear seats completely remotely. They flip right down. We've got shopping bag hooks back here, 12-volt socket. You know, it's really nicely set up. And the fact that the mid-spec Tiguan now has an electric tailgate as well is a nice little convenience. But the big question is, how does the Challenger to the throne, the Toyota RAV4, compare? Because not only is the RAV4 all new, it sits on Toyota's TNGA platform, which we've rated really highly in the past. It's also more practical, and that's actually despite getting a bit shorter over the outgoing model. There's more boot space for a start. Got another electric tailgate here. It isn't the quickest, but once it's up, there's a good amount of space. Immediately you can tell that the load floor is lower. So that means that there's less height to lift heavy things over. Like the Volkswagen, you've got a flat load bay there and no load lip, so stuff just slides straight on out. But you don't have that clever cargo cover. You've got a traditional one like that. And there's also not those classic little conveniences that you get in European cars. There's no shopping bag hooks. There is a 12-volt socket though, and there's a little netted section off to one side. So hey, it ain't all bad. Then heading around the side, we'll jump in the back seat first. Doors open nice and wide. Easy step-in height. Step-in height's a bit lower. In fact, the RAV4 actually sits a bit lower than the Tiguan, so old people will be able to get into this thing a bit easier. And there's also a good amount of space. So what we've got here is, for myself, it's 6 foot, decent headroom, about the same as the Volkswagen, really good legroom and good tow room. You can fit 3 across, a touch easier in this car. There's also good leg support. And you know, like the Volkswagen, it can recline a bit, but the seats don't actually move fore and aft. So with the RAV4's boot, it's 580 litres of space. I don't think I mentioned that. That's 580 litres like genuine, because these seats don't move, unlike the slightly weird figure in the Volksy. Flip down armrest, 2 big cup holders. No espresso holder though, I know. 2 air vents in the back though, but the temperature zone is controlled by the people up front. There's no separate zone back here. But you do have 2 fast charging 2.1 amp USB ports. That's better than the one in the back of the Volkswagen. Plus, we have all the soft touch materials here in the second row of the Toyota, so it actually feels kind of premium. I like that. What about in the front seat? Does it continue there? Spoiler alert, it continues there. And that is because we've specified our long-term RAV4 as a cruiser. That's the top spec in the Toyota, and that gives you lots of nice stuff that I'm going to run through. The most important thing for me that stepping up to the cruiser gives you is actually a premium feeling interior. So on the lower grades of RAV4, all of this stuff here is hard touch plastic, which feels really cheap. The cruiser gives you the same repeated leather color and soft materials. But apart from that, you know, a lot of it is shared across the RAV4 range. So new dashboard, very different to the old car. We've got like a tablet mounted 8-inch touchscreen up here. It's easy to use. Problem is, it doesn't have CarPlay or Android Auto yet. Now, if you're watching overseas and it does have CarPlay in your market, that's awesome. But here in Australia, it doesn't. It'll be a free update sometime between October and Christmas. That'll make it easier to use. Now, the Cruiser also has a partially digital screen in the instrument cluster. It's certainly not as immersive as the Volkswagen's active info display, but it's a start. I like the small little steering wheel, thin rimmed, feels good in the hand, looks pretty good too, I reckon. And I love what they've done with these kind of rubberized dials for the climate control, the volume, and in the door grabs as well. It adds a nice little texture to the cabin. The seats are not as plush. We've gone for the nutmeg leather color. Most of them have black leather. That kind of sucks in my opinion. I'd go for this nice nutmeg. It's actually wearing okay, despite my love of blue jeans. It's not wearing too badly over our long-term loan. Some other cool practicality stuff. We've got wireless charging. The Tiguan doesn't have that. We've got this cool tray up here. Love that. big cup holders, but the door bins aren't lined. There's still a couple of things that the Tiguan does that just feels a bit more thoughtful. But we do have a standard sunroof. Don't have to pay extra for that in the RAV4. So, you know, all in all, I reckon this thing's got a pretty nice interior. But I also think it looks pretty cool. If we just come around the front a little bit here, I mean, it looks hugely different to the old RAV4. That's where you'd start. But it's also kind of blocky, maybe a little bit more masculine styling compared to the old car. And I actually think it works really well on this vehicle. Let me know down in the comments whether you like the styling of the RAV4, whether you think it looks good compared to the Tiguan. But a real decider is going to be how these things drive, because the approach of these cars to driving dynamics is very different. In the RAV4, we have a naturally aspirated engine paired to 3 electric motors because we have an all-wheel drive here. The Tiguan, it's more conventional, turbocharged 2-litre petrol 4-cylinder. Which one works best for your day-to-day duties and to live with every day? That's what we're going to find out now. And to start with, I'm going to take the Volkswagen Tiguan out for a drive. So in this comparison, the Tiguan's biggest advantage, I reckon, is actually how it drives. I think it looks pretty good outside, and I think the interior is modern and upmarket, but it's actually the sort of premium approach to dynamics that Volkswagen tend to take across the board that makes the Tiguan just feel a bit more expensive from behind the wheel than the RAV4. That's not to say that the Toyota is bad to drive or anything, and we'll get into its unique dynamic benefits in a few minutes, but the Tiguan has, you know, the benefit of, I reckon, a really solid approach to vehicle engineering. That starts with one of the great current 4-cylinder petrol engines. So what this Tiguan has is basically a detuned version of the Golf GTI engine, the engine known as EA888 within the Volkswagen family. And in this configuration, it makes 132 kilowatts of power and 320 Newton meters of torque. So, you know, not blazingly quick, but certainly adequate for a vehicle of this size and weight. Around town, there's heaps of torque. The entire complement of torque is available from just above idle, so it feels pretty zippy. And the gearbox is mostly compliant, although I'll come back to that point in a second. Out on the open road, it's quick enough. Very fast overtaking is where you start to feel just a little bit hemmed in by the, I guess, slightly modest power figure. You can get the Tiguan with faster engines, notably a 162 kilowatt, 350 Newton meter tune of this engine. And you can also get it with a torquier 2-litre diesel as well. But I reckon the 132 TSI strikes the right sort of balance for most people. Couple of issues. The first thing that I hinted at is the gearbox. Once you're on the move, the 7-speed DSG is okay, it's fine. But at town speeds, this car still sort of retains some of those jerky characteristics of DSG gearboxes. There can be a little bit of hesitation, sort of on and off the throttle quickly at low speeds, like, you know, in a very badly moving traffic jam or in a car park or something. So that takes a little bit of learning. The CVT gearbox in the RAV4 is more boring of a gearbox, but it doesn't have those sorts of stuttery characteristics. The second issue with the Tiguan's engine is the fuel use. It likes a drink. Around town, we've sort of been able to get, 11 litres per 100 Ks out of this thing, 12 litres. And on the open road, that calms down to 7.5, 8 in the real world. That's obviously way more fuel being used than the RAV4, and the Tiguan requires premium petrol, so that's something to keep in mind from a running cost perspective. But from there on, from those criticisms on, it's basically, everything is in the green for the Tiguan. The handling of this thing is great. It just handles like a sort of taller, slightly heavier Golf. It's fun to drive. The chassis is extremely well resolved. Classic MQB platform dynamics, so body roll is hemmed in really well. The steering is very positive. It's quite quick and direct, so you don't need to turn the wheel too much to get the result that you're after from the front wheels. There's lots of grip, especially in this spec. We've got Continental Conti Sport contact tires. I mean, that's a pretty good tire for an SUV, so there's no issue with grip, and traction's good too, thanks to the 4-motion all-wheel drive system. No worries there. The brake feel, way more natural than the RAV4. It's really good. It's also quite refined. It's comfortable. Got all the safety tech now standard on the mid-spec Tiguan, so that's great, and that all works well. The lane keep assist, the active cruise. We don't have a 360-degree camera, however. The RAV4 does have that at this level. And the other thing is that the driving position is just a little bit weird in the Tiguan. I've always felt it's a bit minivan-esque with the steering wheel kind of tilted up to the sky. I don't love that. I think the RAV4 has a better driving position, but in most other ways, the Tiguan is the driver's car of this set. The RAV4's biggest benefit in this set is, I think, the fact that it has the right powertrain for this moment in time. The Tiguan's 2-litre Turbo 4 is a really nice engine, don't get me wrong. That's the kind of engine that I want to drive in this sort of form factor, but I've got to admit the RAV4 kind of gets the balance really right. So fuel prices in Australia are rising. They've been rising for some time. So an engine that can combine, good torque, pretty nippy sort of feeling with outstanding fuel economy is a great recipe. And that's what the RAV4 does. So Toyota's hybrid thing has been around for ages, like 20 years, a little bit more, but they've actually finally refined it to the point where I no longer feel annoyed by it. So I've driven quite a lot of Toyota hybrids now, and it always used to kind of peeve me, that feeling of changing from the electric motor to the petrol engine. It always used to be kind of a jarring, vibey sort of transition. The RAV4 is the best Toyota or Lexus I have ever driven on this point. So the transition from electric to petrol is almost seamless. Your ears hear it, but there's no longer that clunk or that vibration that runs through the car, and that's awesome. Because if you got music playing, your ears don't really hear that. It just is a seamless experience. So, the Toyota RAV4, it's got a 2.5-litre naturally aspirated petrol, and that combines with either 2 electric motors in the front-wheel drive or 3 electric motors in this all-wheel drive, the eFour all-wheel drive system. And it works really well. So the electric, or the battery I should say, has a pretty small capacity, about 1.9 kilowatt hours. That's small as far as EVs go, but it's not about having a big heavy battery, this car. It's just about having a small one that gives the electric motors enough juice to get this thing up and running. Because of course, the thing that consumes the most petrol is getting a static object moving. So the RAV4 will almost always start off the line in full electric. And you get up to maybe 20-25k an hour and it switches over to petrol. By that point, you've already got some momentum on board, so it isn't sucking down fuel at a rate of knots. And that's what gives the RAV4 its biggest benefit here, which is fuel consumption. It just doesn't use much fuel. It's happy to run on E10, it doesn't care. And we found in our long-term testing that our combined average fuel economy across all the disciplines that we drive in our everyday lives is 6.2 litres per 100 kilometres. Now, reading the RAV4 forums, there's lots of people out there who use less fuel, and that's great, but I quite like driving quickly, so that's on me. But 6.2 litres per 100, that's less than half of what the Tiguan uses, so that's amazing. Toyota doesn't publish a combined torque figure, but from the seat of my pants, it feels about 350 Newton meters to me. So, pretty well on a par, maybe a little bit more torque than the Tiguan with its turbocharged engine. And it's good in the country. It can overtake just fine because on full throttle, it combines electric propulsion and the petrol engine. So they work together. It's very thrashy, driven hard, I will say that. It's not a great sounding petrol engine. It gets really loud if you drive it hard, and that's one area where the RAV4 doesn't satisfy, but it makes good progress. And that's not all, because the RAV4 sits on Toyota's new TNGA platform, and that is a huge advance over the chassis of the old car, which was always really, really average to drive. TNGA has made Toyotas feel genuinely good dynamically. So the ride quality is compliant, soft, definitely. It's way more comfortable over bumps than the Tiguan, but the body control is a little bit worse, but it's a very compliant suspension, nicely balanced, and the handling is good, especially for a Toyota. You really have to rethink your feelings on Toyota SUVs, because this thing goes around corners well. The steering is lovely, very quick. And as I say, the body control is okay, not as good as the Volkswagen, but certainly, you know, above average for this set. And it's very, very refined and quiet in the cabin. I also like the driving position of this car better because the steering wheel just isn't pointing up as high as the Tiguan's, and the seat is a little bit better set for me. And also you get all the safety stuff. So you get adaptive cruise control, you get a 360-degree camera, you get blind spot. You don't get lane keep that works well. You get it in theory, but it kind of bounces from side to side in the lane. But that's one area where VW are doing a bit better. But otherwise, the RAV4, really, really nice car to drive. So those are my thoughts on the new Toyota RAV4 against the Volkswagen Tiguan. So which one should you buy? Well, if you want an SUV that feels most like a sports car, kind of bundled up in a practical shape, then get a Tiguan. It's great to drive. I think it's really good to look at too. I like the interior. But the car here that wins because of its all-round achievement is the Toyota RAV4. It's unbelievably economical. It's not bad to look at. It's comfortable to sit in. It's cheap to buy. It's incredibly cheap to maintain. So with all that sort of stuff just adding up and up and up, I think it's pretty hard to stop yourself from coming to the conclusion that the new RAV4 is just a really good all-round SUV. Now, if you haven't subscribed to Chasing Cars, please do so below the video. Hit the notification bell. You never miss one of our full-length Australian video car reviews. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.